Hello, everyone. My name is Stan, and we are starting our today's webinar about a really interesting topic about when it's too late to start automation. Actually, we believe that automation is something really important, something really you can't imagine your project without, and that's what we'll discuss today. Today with us will be good partners of QATestLab, guys from Testify, test automation engineers from Testify, Eric and Amir, and also there will be a colleague of mine, Konstantin, who is a test automation engineer from QATestLab. As I mentioned, the topic is really interesting, but it's not only interesting because it's important for all the development processes, but it's really interesting because there are very different approaches about when to start automation. And today we'll see very different points of view to this subject, and I believe that's something that will be very interesting for all. So let us start introducing the guys who be main points of discussion, main people to discuss today's topic. Konstantin is my colleague. Kostya, a couple of words about the topic we are discussing today. Yes, sir.
Sure. As Stan said, my name is Konstantin. I'm a test automation engineer at QATestLab. My job is to develop test and automation frameworks for our clients. And today we will be discussing such an interesting and important topic as to when to start automation, when it's the best to start automation, when it's possible and when it's not, and everything like that. So I believe you will hear something interesting today for sure, so stay tuned.
Thanks, Kostya. And from another side, Eric and Amir, who are representing Testify company, a company from Norway, a very interesting one, specialized in test automation, having really interesting projects and really interesting approach. I believe guys will tell about themselves much better than me, but just for our audience, you can be sure that these professionals and very interesting approach of Testify is something we'll discuss today as well. So, Eric, Amir, a couple of words about Testify and about you.
Okay. Hello, I'm Erik Røkstad, and I work for Testify. And regarding Testify, I'd just like to say that we're a bunch of fairly ambitious people, mostly with a technical background, and many of us with strong both academic and industrial profiles. So we believe we have the people with the necessary toolkit to take on most test automation challenges. So that's sort of our core business. Yeah, Amir?
Yeah, my name is Amir Yaznoshanov. I've been with Testify since 2012. I'm a test developer and mostly with experience with performance testing and robustness testing. Today I'm just going to accompany Eric for this webinar, and I hope we deliver some useful content for the viewers.
Thanks, guys, for representing yourself. In terms of your approach, I remember, Eric, when we met here in Kyiv, you actually mentioned that when you wrote at least a line of code, it's already too late to start automation. Yeah, that was the approach. And could you please tell us about it? How Testify does it, in what way, and when it's actually the time to start automating tests?
Yeah, I'll try to elaborate a bit on our practice regarding test automation. First of all, I would just like to say that for Testify as a company, test automation is basically our bread and butter. So to us, it's already given that when we take on a contract, that test automation is going to be a core part of the delivery. So that's sort of the overall context. Test automation is basically what we do. And regarding test automations, there are various motivations for doing test automation, but I would like to, in particular, dig into two relevant motivations for doing test automation. And the first is the ability to be able to release code faster and more frequent. In a sort of a continuous delivery manner. So when I say faster, I mean that you have shorter lead time on your task. So there's the time between the initiation of the task and the completion of the task is very short. So you can get things fast into production. And by frequent, I mean that you are able to release very frequently. So this is always often a driver for the customers. To be able to do so. And in order to do so, you need to have many things in place. But a very important parameter in that context is certainly test automation. So that is one means to get there. And the other motivation for doing test automation can be if the test task itself is of such complexity that that also automation is simply required in order to be able to ensure the necessary coverage or to be able to test it adequately. So that's another kind of motivation. And I'd like to address sort of our approach in terms of addressing those two kinds of motivations for doing test automation. And I'll just start with the latter one because that's a very generic topic, of course. You have a very complex task that you need to test. But examples of that can be, for example, if you're testing a highly critical system, for example, software in an airplane or a car or something like that. In that sense, it needs to be tested more exhaustively and more precisely and more systematically than we're able to with a just pure manual test effort. So in that sense, you need to have some sort of automation in your test process. For example, it could be to have some sort of automation in your test case generation. So you have a very systematic approach to generating your test suite, so you know exactly what kind of coverage you have in your testing. Other examples could be, for example, often performance and load testing, and also robustness testing would be are often very hard to do in a pure manual manner. So that's also, in our experience, test activities that often itself requires test automation. And all of this is a quite generic topic. So to these things, we don't have a kind of specific approach, but because the task could vary a lot. But in a general sense, if you have a highly complex system and you need to go into test automation in order to be able to test it adequately, then in general sense, we would certainly look into some sort of model-based testing, I'd say. So you can have a precise formal specification of your system under test, which you can use to generate abstract test cases, executable test cases, generate test data, and ideally also your test oracle. So that would certainly be one thing we would look into in such a case. And for example, we could use EasyFeed for doing that. It's a tool for many of those aspects. And in terms of performance and load testing, we would certainly look into both off-the-shelf tools for doing so, or if the context would require so, we would also look into developing tools to do so in the context that we're in. And in terms of robustness testing, that often also would require some sort of test automation. We would certainly look into frameworks for mocking out your context of the component that you're supposed to test. So you got full control of the environment around your component. So you can take things down, take things up, so you're able to get the robustness of your system. So that was, in a generic sense, our approach to the test automation motivated by complex tasks. And then for the other motivation, which is the ability to release faster and more frequently. In that sense, we have a more, I would say, specific approach. But for us, the context here is that we work as an integrated part of the system development process. We work with the development teams in this in order to achieve this. And our contribution is then to provide methods and tools in order to ensure an efficient test process as possible. And ideally, we would like to come in as early as possible. For example, having a test architect in at an early stage in the pre-phase of the project, so we can set the premises for the test and the whole development process. So it's set up in the manner that we want. And the goal here is to ensure fast and efficient releases with low risk. And core to this approach, in our perspective, is mainly three things. So there's some means that needs to be in place in order to achieve these goals. And one of them is certainly how you organize your development team. We believe it's very important to have a cross-functional team. So you have resources, you have functional resources, you have developers, test developers, resources handling the environment, the deployment releases, etc. All of them deployed in one team, working tightly together across disciplines. So you don't have the traditional handover between each stage of the development phase. So environment specification then delivers something to the developers, and then they hand over something to the testers, and they hand things over to the production. But you have an autonomous team that work tightly together with the whole product. So we believe that's a key factor. And where the idea is that the whole team should take responsibility for the quality of the system, the quality of the delivery. So that's one factor, how you organize your development team. And another thing that's important keywords, I would say, is behavior-driven development, and perhaps also combined with test-driven development. And key factors to that is, first of all, that you build thin layers of functionality through your entire value chain. So you sort of get all your integrations up at an early stage, because both establishing and testing integration is often time-consuming. So if you get your whole value chain up early, you're able to reduce risk. You don't have these things later on in the project. And another good thing, another good thing about that is that you can early on write automated end-to-end testing, because you have your whole value chain up at an early stage.
Benefits.
Yeah, benefits was the word I was looking for earlier. Sorry about that. And another key point regarding BDD is that you have functional resources that put forward requirements in a semi-formal or formal way, so that you can basically use that as an input, direct input to the test specifications. So then you have a nice link between the requirements and the tests. So you have a nice overview of what you're testing. And the third key factor, of course, is the test automation itself. So you put that on top, And we talk about test automation. We talk about the whole testing pyramid, that we have automated tests at all levels of your test pyramid. Not only unit testing and unit integration testing, but also at the system test level and system integration and end-to-end tests. So you have automated tests throughout. And also not only functional testing, but also that you have non-functional automated non-functional tests as a continuous part of your testing. Not something you do in a big chunk at the end of the project. Yeah, and if you do so, in the end, then we believe that the customer would be equipped with an efficient development process, and they have a comprehensive test suite, automated with good test coverage, and last but not least, you have sort of reduced risk of releasing software into production, because you have a short lead time, you have a quick feedback loop, so it's not then the end of the world if you find an error in production, because you're able to handle it quickly.
Yeah, it looks like an ideal picture. I guess there shall be some special, let's call it, requirements to the customer, yeah, requirements to the project which comes to be able to use this approach. Am I right?
Yeah, we have some ideal projects that we want to have more and more of these projects and be able to deliver as best as we can. But of course, every project comes with its own constraints, its own budget, its own timeline. So you have to adapt. It doesn't work to always work towards the ideal situation. Of course, you need to adapt when the condition in the project makes you do that. So maybe in a project, if you enter at a later stage in the project, you have to start maybe from the low-hanging fruits, to say that. You have to find an entry point that you could deliver something to the project, hopefully as soon as possible. Some customers are patient, some customers need some results in the first week. So you have to adapt, and we are a consultancy company, so we are familiar with these complexities every now and then. But the way that we model, or we would like to model in Testify, is to have is to work with the project, within the project, from the earlier stages. And we believe that the earlier we begin with the project, the more we can help them.
And the more gain you get from the test automation. The earlier, that's my, yeah.
Yeah, thanks, 100%. And you, by the way, mentioned that for some particular projects, you even adopted or created some specific tools on your end, yeah, to execute it. Is it something usual? Are you trying to create such a toolkits for every specific project, or there is some amount of tools which you're mainly using?
An important context to that is when we do that, we are working with a very system development itself. So they are already used to develop and maintain software. And then the threshold to build some test or test infrastructure is lower than, whereas if we have a customer which is not used to develop software, of course, then you would more look into off-the-shelf software for doing test automation. Yeah, I'd say so.
I would say our goal is not those tools. We use the tools to just deliver the purpose of the testing, which is managing risk in a very broad sense. So if we can use some third-party tool, then it's easier to use maybe, and it's faster to deliver some results. Then we, of course, look into that, those alternatives. But if there isn't anything in the market, or if the tool is very expensive, or for some reason not possible to use in that particular project, then we obviously need to look into some sort of developing our tool or some scripting to be a mini tool, if you name it like that. So the goal is testing. The goal is not the tool, but the tool is of course usable or useful to the end goal.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, guys. Let me unmute myself. So here with us is Kostya Konstantin. Yeah, the person who actually also works in automation in some a bit different projects, but still it's the same field. Konstantin, I believe you might have any questions to the guys as well.
Yep. Well, while I was hearing that presentation, that approach looks to be very good, but it sounds like those projects you work with should have a lot of resources, and the set of requirements for the project is very strict. From my experience, there are not much such projects on the market. So should be some big companies, big projects which have lots of budgets and who understands that the automation is very important thing, very important part of the development process and delivery process. So my question would be, could you guys tell us what should be those maybe top 3 or so those main requirements for the project for you to step in and consider it as suitable for your approach?
Yeah, I think you're right about that. And as I said, an important part of our approach is to come in at an early stage, so we can be able to influence how they set up the project and how they do development and how the processes around the system development should be, so that we can get things in place. We can get requirements in a specific manner. We can establish development teams with certain roles, and we can have a good link between tests and requirements. So I definitely say that is a big part of this particular approach. Would you like to fill in something?
Well, I don't think we're, if you want to do test automation, I don't think you're necessarily bound to a certain type of project or with a certain amount of budget at your disposal. But obviously, if we get a customer that needs to have control risk or needs to control its the quality of the product, obviously there should be some level of drive, ambition to get a certain quality. If a certain product is not supposed to have quality or a certain level of quality, then maybe the answer would be that, okay, maybe you don't need us. But most projects, most serious projects, they do come with a lot of requirements on quality. So it's very rare, or maybe ever, we don't see such projects that often. When we talked about we talked about the benefits of entering the project from its earliest stages, but it doesn't limit us to only those circumstances. We have been into projects that we have entered some of the very latest stages before release, and we still have been able to deliver something for the projects. Obviously, you have to compensate. Obviously, you have to adapt, and you have to moderate your expectations of testing. So if you come in a project very late in the development stage, maybe you don't get the time to automate every type of testing. Maybe you have to choose a particular type of testing and create some tools, or you reuse some tools to be able to deliver some results as soon as possible. I can, for example, from experience, I can just mention a project that I was more or less recently involved in part-time, and we were introduced to the project about 2 months before the release date, and this was an online shopping system. We obviously couldn't get to automate everything in terms of testing, so we chose that this is one of the main points that the customer raised during the first discussions, was that they were very worried about the performance. They are relatively okay about the functional quality of the product, because they have been some pilot users using the system all the time, but they lack any idea how the system will perform if 10 users suddenly or simultaneously use the system. We could, in a matter of weeks, we could reuse some off-the-shelf performance tools and performance testing tools, and then we could actually deliver the results within the time scope that we had, which were very constrained. So when we're talking about automated testing, we're not talking about necessarily about this mega project that needs like an army of people writing code for 2 years to be able to deliver something. Actually, one of the benefits of automated testing can be that you need some initial investment on your competency, or buying a tool potentially. Although you need that initial investment, but maybe you're actually, in some cases, you're actually better off to deliver something quicker and with less overall cost.
Yeah, completely agree. Thanks, Amir. Actually, that's the project which you mentioned, when it's in the late development stages, it's something we really face very often here in our practice. And I believe that's something Konstantin could also share his experience about, because it would be just perfect to know your practice and your approaches to this.
Of course, I will tell you about our experience at QATestLab, which projects we face with, and problems and our solutions. Actually, our reality and our experience is slightly different from which guys told us, because yes, that's true. Mainly the projects which come to us are already on their way to delivery, so they have already implemented some part of the functionality, and from our experience, that's usually something about 50%. Sometimes it could be even more, 70-80%. So our challenge is to step in somewhere in the middle of the project, I would say. So there are a lot of challenges in this situation. Sometimes Eric told us that when Testify starts working as a project, they usually the main requirement is to have a clear and a good documentation, all requirements defined, and etc. In our turn, sometimes we work with the projects which don't have any documentation. Some small startups or so. Sometimes documentation is there, but it was written some time ago, and it's really outdated. So we need to handle all the stuff. So our approach, here comes our approach. We usually, when we start working with a project, we first of all we should know what the project needs at this point where we start working. Is a documentation? What are those requirements and needs? What the customer wants from us? What the customer wants from the project? So there goes a lot of conversation. That's the only way to get information. So we had a lot of meetings with those product team guys from the customer. If there is some documentation that's great, we take it, learn it, and start working with it. But if it is not, so our approach will be to write the documentation, create it. So first of all, we need to, that's for sure, to make any robust test and to raise quality, you need documentation. It's not a secret. So if there is not any documentation, we should create, and we do it. We can write test cases, test plans, manage all the stuff. Of course, the second step would be to verify and verify all those test documentation with the customer to make sure we understand everything correct, that this requirements and documentation meets the needs of the customer. The next step for us would be to actually do some automation, write code, usually our approach is to create custom testing frameworks which cover particular project needs. Of course, we use a lot of frameworks from the market, some libraries or so, but each our framework usually is unique, I would say. Not as much, but the goal is not to do something which project doesn't need. We only do what is need to be done here. So we write automation, run it, have some reports, analyzing those reports, documenting bugs, have a conversation with the development, how to fix, discussing all the stuff. And if there is a need, and if our customer wants it, the best way, of course, is to follow the project with this approach as far as we can, as far as the customer needs us. So that's it. I believe, in short, that's our approach.
Yes, I have a question for this good description.
Is it possible?
Eric, Amir, we have a question, as I understand.
Yeah. So my question to Konstantin is that when you enter the automation phase of a project, do you place your test automator, the test developer, do you place it in the development team, or it's something beside the team, beside the project?
Usually, almost always, we act as a separate team. We are inserted not in the development team, but in the QA team. So we are trying to become a part of a quality control team and behave like that. This approach, of course, has its some limitation, but that's it. Not every team or developer is ready to share their code to the third party. That's a limitation. Sometimes it is very hard to overcome it. So we work, like it said, like a black box team, like a black box functionality. We have interfaces to it, and we try to do our best using those interfaces. So to do that's it.
I was
I would say an obvious drawback about that approach then is that the motivation to do test automation is only driven by you as a test organization, not by the customer, and so it's for you. It's just a matter of, we're going to test this. Is it more efficient for us at this particular point in time, without any particular future perspective, whether it's most efficient to test it automatically or manually? So yeah, I'd say that's a drawback in that context, because they don't deliver anything back to the customer. So
this is not completely true.
Yeah.
Actually, the first point, we only consulting the customer in terms of what should be tested, how it should be tested. If they don't have their own QA specialist, also we are trying to do this. But always the customer decides what to test and how to test it. We only provide some best practices from our experience, but all those documentation, the first part of our work is to write a documentation. All those documentations goes through the approval process from the specialist, from the customer side. So we don't decide what to do and how to do it. The second part is about deliverables. Deliverables from our side is, I believe there are three main points I can say. The first one is test documentation, of course. When you write all those stuff, we usually use some test documentation management systems like Testdriven or so. So we create all those test cases, test suites, and at the end, in the process, of course, customer will have access. So that's the first deliverable from our side. The second one is test automation code base itself. Usually, when we start doing automation in the project, we request repository, Git repository in any service in the cloud from the customer side. So all the code base is actually written into the customer's Git repository, not ours. That's the best practice for us. Of course, if for speeding up the process, we can start in our own repository, but at some point, all the code base will be transferred to the customer's repository. That is the second point. The third point,
I didn't get that previously, but that's nice, because then there's also then you also bring value back to the customer in terms of future maintenance of the project and stuff like that. And I just believe that's important.
Yes, that's true. And there is a third part. Sometimes it's optional, but usually we try to do it, and the most of our projects needs it. So the third part is continuous integration and test run environment. Of course, also we request, how does it look like? It's a cloud server. Most of the time it's a cloud server where we configure continuous integration systems like Jenkins, Travis, Circle, or so. And we configure test running environment, grids, drivers, everything which is needed for it. Configure running test automatically by a scheduler or by some triggers, like you push some new code into the product code base, system triggers on that, runs tests, and gives back the results. So this, I believe, the third important part from us to the customer.
Yes. No, absolutely. That makes a lot of sense, of course. But if I may add a comment to what Eric just mentioned, you know, one of the most successful cases that I have had experienced myself in a project with a test manager. I'm not a test manager myself, but one of the most successful test managers I've worked with was really good to, if you like, almost educate the project with the testing mindset, with the testing approach from top to bottom. And in my experience, kind of integrating into the project, integrating the testing, if you like, into the project helps them to have a closer understanding of testing and better understanding of what the test phases are, what is the goal of the testing, what are the pros and cons. And after a while, I realized that the project manager also were more and more interested into the testing, and instead of getting no's, after a while, yes, into what we were allowed to do, what we were. So yeah, I would like to just say that in the if you look at the big picture, I would say that the most valuable thing we can deliver to a customer is to help them, of course, with tools and automation and everything, to help them have a better understanding of testing and help them kind of be standalone in the future with testing. So if they get into the routine of testing, getting to the developers, the architects get into the routine of working with test people, then over long run, they can deliver better and better products, in my experience. So that's why in some of the projects, we don't maybe, unfortunately, get the chance to be integrated into the system, into the project as much as we want. But in several instances that I have experienced more or less from firsthand, we have had the best results when we were integrated fully into the project.
Completely agree with you, Amir, but this process is very slow paced, and it takes a lot of time to change mindsets of the teams, especially when they have their own vision on the development process and have some experience. Of course, we try to do so, but sometimes it's very hard to achieve. I completely agree with you.
I think you're 100% right on that. At the end of the day, everything boils down to mindset and vision. Some people are maybe easier to kind of engage and to maybe a little bit shift their mindset a bit. But in some cases and in some projects, maybe it becomes impossible. I don't know.
Thanks, guys.
Could we add more comments? Could I add another comment, Stan?
Yeah, sure.
Just regarding the approach, Konstantin, when you come sort of late into the project and you guys get the handover from a development team and help us test this, I would say a drawback of that is that then you guys as a test organization need to learn everything that the development team has already spent for learning all over again. So you sort of have the double cost compared to if you work more tightly integrated. So I would say that's a drawback of that approach as to whether we can do testing as a more integrated part of the development process. So do you have any thoughts on that?
I believe that's true, but as long as not us deciding when to step in, we can control this process. But you're completely right. Integration is a good stuff, but customer comes to us and asks us to help, and we do our best with what we have and where we are. That's our reality.
Yeah, I understand that you're dealing with reality out there. So, I just think we all should help educate the customers and into being more in that manner, you know. Because if you don't automate from the start, you miss out on many of the benefits. So yeah.
Could you maybe name the different roles that you need when you work with those types of projects? I mean, what kind of people you sit down and you dig into the system? Are they more architects? Are they more on the functional level? Are they technical?
Actually, to cover those market needs which we face, usually our test engineers should be quite universal people. So they should be all those people in one. So they should have a good understanding how to build a framework. What are there? So some part of them should be architect, of course, some functional. And from our experience, it is a benefit if test automation engineer has some manual testing background. It helps a lot to understand the whole process. What's bug tracking systems, project management system, all this stuff. So that way, specialist is more universal. We can put such a specialist into almost every project without some problems, because we know he will handle it because of all those experience.
Okay. No. Thank you.
Okay, thank you guys. Really interesting discussion. And we have some questions from the audience at this stage. I believe we can answer them. Let me read it for you, and you can answer. Asha Brown asks, can automation completely eliminate the need for manual testing? I believe that no, but glad to know your opinion, guys.
Yeah, I can.
Yeah, sure, go ahead.
Well, the answer, as you said, is basically no. There are certain types of testing that prove to be harder to automate. The usual case is testing for usability and the look and feel of a certain interface. These are the things that is very, very difficult to automate, or maybe some of these aspects may be even impossible. So in those cases, definitely you need some sort of manual testing. And in addition, we have to remember that automated testing, the goal of automated testing is not to get rid of manual testing altogether. You still, even on the very straightforward functional tests, you still need some manual testing. Some pilot users that work with your system in the production environment. So you can't be, so you shouldn't really aim to even to remove manual testing. But automated testing helps you manage risk and manage quality in a more timely fashion, so that you can maybe release more faster and so on. So both of them they have to complement each other, I would say, in best case scenario.
Yeah, I agree with that. But I think you also can think of if you do test automation well, and you have a good automated test suite, and you succeed in the things around the frequent deliveries and short lead time on task, that would reduce the risk of deploying things into production. And that could also be used to reduce the amount of manual testing that you need to do, because then and you have a quick feedback loop, so you encounter things in production early, and you're able to fix it fast, and then there's not such a big deal if you encounter errors in your production. Of course, you have to take the criticality of the system into account. Yeah. I believe test automation can be used to reduce the amount of manual testing in that manner as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, sounds guys. There is also a question from Marina. Is it possible to substitute manual testing by automated testing? I guess almost the same one. Actually, it's as we just mentioned. It's good to show it to It's good to automate main part of testing, to automate those parts which can be automated, but usually manual testing and test automation is like complements, not substitutes in testing process. So next question from Ostap.
I just add one remark to that as well, because if you have a good automated test suite, I guess you can free up more resources to do more exploratory manual testing. So yeah, that's basically what you end up doing now.
Very good point.
Totally agree. So how automation influences on the total cost of testing? What is more cost effective, to test manually or to write auto tests? Guys, your practice, Konstantin, your thoughts.
I will start, I believe. From our experience, and this comes not from air, but from research. Automation, of course, automation is more expensive when it starts. So you need more resources to establish all the stuff. You need more experienced personnel. You need specialists. You need coders. You need programmers to develop all these tools. Of course, it looks like it is more expensive to achieve than test something manually. But we should think about limitations of manual testing. When you have some small project, let's say some mobile application, mobile game, not such a big, of course you can test it manually. But when, let's say, your project is under heavy development, your project grows, and at some point in time, you will need more testers and more and more and more. And the pace and the tempo will be the same, but you will need to constantly increase and raise your QA team, manual QA team. That is where automation is, of course, better. From our experience, on the long term, on the big projects with long terms, which are development for years and will be supported for years, it is definitely cheaper to perform automation than manual testing.
Sounds Kostya. Eric, Amir, you want something to add?
I totally agree with what Konstantin just said. Automation testing maybe tends to be a bit more expensive in the beginning, but on the long haul, it usually proves, if it's done smart, it proves to be more cost effective because you can build something once and run it basically forever. Of course, there are some maintenance overhead as well. Test artifacts are just like other artifacts; they need to be updated from time to time. But usually, or maybe always, or most frequently, the costs or the benefits of test automation outpaces the cost of it. And also, we have to maybe not forget that in really large scale projects, it's not only the matter of cost, it might be totally not applicable to continue with manual testing as such. So automated testing in those cases is basically a must, whatever the cost might be.
Yeah, thanks, Amir. And the question from Lord Impact, how often is performance testing part of your test plan? How do you approach performance testing?
Yeah, well, it comes from the need for performance testing. Usually comes from obviously comes from the requirements. So it's not always given that we do performance testing. if a certain component, a certain system has a very low frequency of being used, or the amount of data in that system, in the respective databases is very small, then maybe just an overall check that things work is enough, and you don't need to every time, develop some performance test tools, load testing tools for those. But most of the time, in most systems, at least there are subsystems in those systems that need to be performance tested because they tend to be the core of the system. They tend to be used by many components in that system. They tend to service many customers, or the amount of data is so huge that you definitely need to run performance tests before you go into production and make the system face the production volume data. So I can't say a number, unfortunately. I can't say 90% or 95%, but I would say that if you look into the overall projects, we always have some performance tests, but it's not all substance of the system. Well, it's not every component of that project that needs to be performance tested.
Yeah, and just regarding performance testing and non-functional testing in general, traditionally they're often regarded as separate test activities. That's usually comes at the end of the development phase. Like, oh God, we need to do performance testing as well. Whereas I guess the ideal thing is to have that also as a part of the continuous testing during the project. So we do non-functional testing at the system level on the continuous integration server, on the Jenkins server, whatever. To have that as part of the continuous test suite, along with the functional test. That's the ultimate thing, I suppose.
Yeah.
Thank you, Eric and Amir. I guess really detailed answer. And the question from Maria, let's say I already have a team of manual testers. What are the main reasons for me to hire a test automation team? Okay, Konstantin, you as a test automation team, could you please?
Actually, we can already answer this question because of cost, because of effectiveness of time. You will be able, using automation, you will be able to shorten your delivery times. Of course, there is other benefits. One of them is a human factor. We didn't say about it, but it is there. Automation does never misses some things. It always does which it should. It never sleeps. It is never tired. So this also should be considered. So the main things are effectiveness, speed, reliableness of the system, also cost, reduced cost on the long runs. So I believe that would be main things.
Okay, same concern. Amir or Eric, you want something to add to this question?
No, I think it's fine.
Yeah.
Okay, great. I guess it's all questions we currently have. Let me try to make some small conclusion about what we today discussed. I'm not really a technical guy, but as for me, we just came for the idea that it's better to start automation as soon as it's possible to do it, as early as it's possible to do it. Yeah, in ideal scenario, it shall be started at the very, very beginning of the project. But surely there are some cases when it's already late development stages, and this means such project can be automated from the very beginning. But still, there is a big benefits. There are big benefits from test automation even in such projects, and test automation can be started even at the very end before the release. It surely depends on the project and the client and so on, but both approaches can be applied in different situations. That's what we have. Regarding our further information for all our attendees, we'll keep you updated surely about our further webinars, about if you have any questions, anything you wanted to ask us and forgot, or if you just missed the webinar, want some information, please feel free to write to Testify. You can see Eric's contact details here. Please feel free to write to QATestLab if you want us to help you somehow. And as I mentioned before, we'll share with you the record of the webinar. So please feel free to share it with anyone you think this information can be useful. We'll see you on the next webinars. Eric, Amir, Konstantin, thank you very much for joining today. Really a very interesting discussion. Even, as I mentioned, for me as a non-technical guy, was really useful and really understandable. Thank you very much, guys. Hope to see you again in other webinars.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Not from here.
Thank you, guys.
Yes.
Bye.
Bye.